The horse should have been dangerous. That's what everyone said. He stood alone at the far end of the holding pens, muscles tight beneath a weather-beaten coat, head low, ears flicking at every sound like a loaded spring waiting to snap. One wrong move, they warned, and he'd bolt, or worse. Yet the real danger wasn't the horse. It was the silence around him. The way people looked through him instead of at him. Because sometimes the most powerful secrets survive not by being hidden, but by being ignored. The morning air was sharp with dust and diesel when Daniel Hart arrived at the livestock yard. He hadn't planned to stop. He was just passing through, taking the long way home to avoid an empty ranch that felt too big for one man. 48 years old, shoulders stiff with old injuries, Daniel carried the quiet weight of someone who'd learned how to survive loss by never standing still too long. Horses had once been his life. After the accident, they became his distance. He noticed the horse by accident. A sudden clang of metal made the animal rear halfway, hooves striking the fence with a hollow crack. People nearby cursed and stepped back. Someone laughed nervously. The horse settled again, breathing hard, eyes wide. And that's when Daniel saw it. The old bridle hanging loose around the horse's neck, leather cracked and faded, completely out of place among the modern tack everywhere else. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate. Daniel slowed. His chest tightened with a familiar feeling he hadn't trusted in years. Instinct. "Don't go near that one," a worker called out. "Nobody wants him. Too much trouble." Nobody wants him. Daniel had heard that sentence before. He'd said it to himself once, standing in a hospital hallway, when the doctors told him his riding days were over. When the future he'd planned simply vanished. He took another step closer. The horse pinned his ears, muscles coiling, body angled sideways, ready to flee. But he didn't. He watched Daniel with an intensity that made the noise of the yard fade into the background. There was fear in those eyes, yes, but also recognition. As if the horse had learned that some humans notice too late. Daniel raised his hands slowly, palms open. He didn't speak at first. Horses heard too much shouting already. "Easy," he said finally. "I'm not here to take anything from you." The horse snorted, head tossing once, then settling again. That's when Daniel saw it clearly. Tied into the cheek strap of the bridle, secured with brittle twine, was a folded piece of paper. Old enough that it blended into the leather unless you were looking for it. No one else was looking. Daniel's heart started to pound, and he didn't yet know why. He asked the nearest handler about it. The man shrugged. "Been on him forever, I guess. Probably trash. You want him, take him cheap. Otherwise, transport picks him up tonight." Transport. The word landed like a threat. Daniel pictured crowded trailers, long roads, short endings. The horse shifted closer to the fence, almost without realizing it, closing the distance between them by a single step. That step changed everything. Daniel signed the release papers before logic could catch up. Before fear could talk him out of it. Some decisions don't come from the mind. They come from the part of you that still remembers who you were before life hardened you. The ride back to the ranch was tense. The horse stomped and shifted inside the trailer, testing boundaries, snorting at every unfamiliar sound. Daniel drove slower than usual, one eye on the road, the other on the mirror. "You don't trust easy," Daniel said quietly. "Me neither." The ranch gates creaked open, the sound echoing across land that had once been full of motion. Too quiet now. Too still. Daniel parked and stepped out, heart hammering harder than it had at the yard. When he opened the trailer, the horse refused to move. Minutes passed. 10, 15. Daniel didn't pull. Didn't push. He leaned against the trailer and waited. Because rushing a scared horse only teaches them one thing, that humans don't listen. Finally, the horse stepped down. One hoof. Then another. He stood rigid, scanning the space, nostrils flaring, ready to bolt. The old bridle hung heavy around his neck, the note brushing against his cheek. Inside the barn, Daniel moved carefully, speaking softly, keeping his body turned slightly away, a signal of respect in the horse's language. The animal trembled when Daniel reached for the bridle, but he didn't pull back. Trust doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in inches. When the bridle slipped free, the paper finally loosened and fell into Daniel's hand. It felt wrong to rush this moment. Like opening a door you know will change what's on the other side forever. The paper was brittle, creased, the handwriting barely visible. Daniel unfolded it. And before he even read the words, a chill ran through him. Because this wasn't a note someone tied on yesterday. This was a message that had waited. Through years of being ignored. Through auctions and trailers and strangers. Waiting for the right hands. Waiting for someone who wouldn't look away. Daniel didn't read the letter right away. He stood there in the barn with the paper trembling slightly between his fingers, dust motes floating through the narrow beam of afternoon light like time itself had slowed down. The horse stood a few feet away, head lowered, watching him, not with fear this time, but with something heavier. Expectation. It felt wrong to rush. As if the words had already waited long enough, and deserved respect. Daniel leaned back against the stall door and finally unfolded the brittle page completely. The handwriting was uneven, pressed deep into the paper, written by someone who hadn't had much time or much calm. If you are reading this, then I failed to come back. Daniel's breath caught. The horse shifted, hooves scraping softly against the barn floor. This horse's name is Ash. He is not wild. He is scared. Please don't punish him for what I couldn't stop. Daniel swallowed hard. He glanced at the horse again. Saying the name out loud felt like unlocking something that had been sealed shut. I trained him myself. He knows voices. He knows kindness. If he fights you, it's because he remembers being taken. Taken. Daniel's pulse began to race as he read on. 25 years ago, a fire took my brother's life. Everyone said it was an accident. It wasn't. Daniel froze. That sentence didn't belong on a scrap of paper tied to a horse. It belonged in police reports, courtrooms, headlines. Yet here it was. The men responsible were never punished. They threatened my family. They took the horse the night I tried to go to the authorities. I tracked him for years. When I finally got him back, I knew they were watching. Daniel felt the weight of the barn close in around him. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore, it was charged. If Ash is wearing this bridle and I am gone, then I chose the only way I could keep him alive. Please forgive me for leaving him where people wouldn't ask questions. Daniel lowered the letter slowly, his hands numb. The horse lifted his head slightly, ears turning toward Daniel, as if listening for something that had been missing for decades. A name was signed at the bottom. Samuel Hart. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. His family name. His older cousin. The man who had vanished when Daniel was 23. The man everyone assumed had run away. The man whose disappearance had fractured the family and left unanswered questions that no one wanted to reopen. Daniel hadn't spoken Samuel's name in years. The world tilted. This can't be, Daniel whispered. But it was. Suddenly the old bridle made sense. The careful knot. The faded paper. The reason no one had ever removed it. Because the horse reacted violently whenever anyone tried. Ash hadn't been aggressive. He had been guarding something. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The letter sat on the kitchen table, weighed down by a coffee mug like it might try to escape. Daniel reread it again and again, each time noticing new details. The pressure of the pen. The urgency. The way Samuel had written as if he knew time was running out. Daniel remembered Samuel teaching him how to read a horse's body language. How to stand quietly until the animal decided to trust you. How patience wasn't weakness, it was communication. And now, 25 years later, Samuel was still teaching him something. Through a horse. Outside, Ash paced the corral, stopping occasionally to look toward the house. He didn't call out. Didn't kick the fence. Just watched. Daniel stepped onto the porch. It's okay, he said softly. I'm still here. Ash exhaled slowly, a deep sound that carried more relief than Daniel expected. That was the moment Daniel understood. Ash wasn't just surviving. He was waiting. The next days were not easy. Ash resisted the halter. Refused to be led. Spooked at sudden movements. Once, when Daniel reached too quickly, Ash reared and slammed into the fence, panic flashing across his eyes like a trapped animal reliving an old nightmare. Daniel backed away immediately. Not like that, he murmured. I hear you. Every interaction became a negotiation. Every step forward came with 2 steps back. But slowly, so slowly it could only be seen in hindsight, things began to change. Ash started eating when Daniel was nearby. Then standing still. Then allowing a gentle touch on the shoulder. Trust doesn't arrive with grand gestures. It arrives in silence. Meanwhile, Daniel started digging. Old newspaper clippings. Missing person reports. Fire records. Everything about the night Samuel's brother had died. A barn fire. Ruled accidental. Case closed. Too clean. Daniel noticed inconsistencies. Witnesses who changed stories. Reports that skipped key details. Names that appeared once, then vanished. And one thing that kept appearing in the background of it all. A local land development company that no longer existed. Or so it seemed. Daniel felt a familiar knot tighten in his chest. He had spent years avoiding conflict, avoiding pain. But now the past wasn't knocking. It was standing in his barn. Ash's presence became Daniel's anchor. Every time doubt crept in, he watched the horse's eyes, how they softened when Daniel spoke Samuel's name. How his ears flicked forward instead of back. This horse remembered. And if Ash remembered, then the truth had survived too. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel brushed Ash's coat for the first time without resistance. Long, steady strokes. Ash stood still, head lowered, breathing slow and deep. Daniel smiled despite the ache in his chest. You did good, he whispered. You held on. Ash leaned, just slightly, into the brush. Daniel hadn't planned to tell anyone. That was his first instinct, to keep the letter quiet, to protect Ash, to let the past stay buried where it couldn't hurt anyone else. Because Daniel knew what happened when old truths were dragged into the light. They didn't just expose the guilty. They reopened wounds that never really healed. But the past had a way of making itself known. It started with a truck. An unfamiliar one. Late afternoon, dust curling behind its tires as it slowed near the fence line. Daniel was in the corral with Ash, practicing something simple, standing still while the halter rested loosely against his neck. Ash tensed at the sound of the engine, head snapping up, muscles tight. Easy, Daniel murmured, placing himself sideways between Ash and the noise. You're safe. The truck idled. Too long. A man stepped out. Mid-60s. Broad-brimmed hat pulled low. Movements slow but deliberate. He didn't wave. Didn't smile. He just stared. Daniel felt the hairs on his arms rise. Can I help you? Daniel called. The man's gaze flicked from Daniel to Ash. And then his face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. That horse, the man said slowly. Where did you get him? Daniel didn't answer right away. He shifted closer to Ash, resting a hand lightly against the horse's shoulder. Ash leaned in, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of trust. Why? Daniel asked. Do you know him? The man swallowed. I used to. That single sentence carried decades of weight. The man's name was Walter Boone. He claimed he'd been a stable hand years ago. That he'd known a man named Samuel Hart. That he'd helped train a young horse with ash-gray markings on his legs, hence the name. Daniel invited him to sit on the porch, never taking his eyes fully off him. Ash watched too, ears rotating, body alert. Walter's hands trembled as he removed his hat. I wondered if I'd ever see that horse again, he said quietly. Didn't think it'd be like this. Daniel pulled the letter from his pocket. Walter's breath hitched when he saw it. You read it, he said. It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, as if bracing himself. I told Sam not to write it down, Walter said. I told him paper doesn't forget. Daniel's chest tightened. Then you knew. Walter nodded slowly. I knew everything. The story that followed was worse than Daniel imagined. The fire that killed Samuel's brother hadn't been an accident. It had been a warning. The development company Daniel had been researching? A front. Used to push families off land that stood in the way of a lucrative expansion. When Samuel's brother refused to sell, the pressure escalated. Then came threats. Then the fire. Samuel tried to go to the authorities. Walter had helped him gather evidence, documents, recordings, names. But someone leaked it. Someone close. They told Sam if he didn't disappear, Walter said, voice cracking, the horse would be the next message. Daniel looked toward the corral. Ash stood quietly, head high, eyes fixed on them. Samuel had loved that horse. More than his own safety, apparently. So he left him, Daniel said softly. Walter nodded. In plain sight. Where no one would think to look. A horse no one wanted. With a bridle no one dared remove. Daniel felt anger surge, hot and sharp. And you let it happen? Walter flinched. I was a coward. I thought staying quiet would keep me alive. Silence fell between them. Ash stomped once. That night, Daniel didn't sleep again. Because now he knew something else. Someone had been watching. Not just remembering, but checking. And if Walter had found Ash, others could too. The next morning, Daniel made a decision he'd been avoiding. He contacted a journalist. Not a big one. A local investigative reporter known for chasing stories no one else would touch. Daniel didn't give her everything. Just enough to spark interest. A missing man. A suspicious fire. A horse tied to both. The response was immediate. Can I come see the horse? She asked. Daniel hesitated. Then looked at Ash, who stood calm beside him, allowing the halter to rest against his neck without flinching. Yeah, Daniel said. I think it's time. The article hit 3 days later. It didn't accuse. It questioned. And that was enough. Calls started coming in. Old neighbors. Retired firefighters. A former clerk who remembered documents being altered. Each piece small on its own, devastating together. But with attention came risk. One evening, Daniel found the ranch gate open. Ash was agitated, pacing the fence line, snorting, eyes wide. Daniel's heart pounded as he checked every corner of the property. Nothing was missing. Nothing damaged. Just a message. You are being seen. Daniel locked the gates and stayed in the barn that night, sitting on a bale of hay while Ash rested nearby. For the first time, Ash lay down fully, legs tucked beneath him, a sign of deep trust. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. You stayed alive for this, he whispered. Didn't you? Ash's ears flicked, then relaxed. If you're still watching, this is the moment where stories usually turn back. But this one doesn't. The threats didn't come loudly. They came quietly. Subtle. The kind meant to make you doubt your own instincts. Daniel noticed them first in the small things. The way a truck slowed near the ranch and didn't stop, the way unfamiliar footprints appeared near the outer fence and vanished by morning, the way Ash would suddenly tense, ears locked on the horizon long before Daniel saw or heard anything himself. Horses feel danger before humans do. And Ash was feeling it now. Daniel kept the barn lights on at night. Slept in short stretches on a cot near the stall. He told himself it was temporary. Just until the investigation cooled down. But deep down he knew the truth. Once buried secrets resurface, they don't retreat quietly. The journalist, Mara Quinn, returned with news Daniel had been both hoping for and dreading. They reopened the fire case, she said, sitting at the worn kitchen table, recorder off for once. Unofficially. Enough pressure built that they couldn't ignore it anymore. Daniel exhaled slowly. That's good, he said. It's also dangerous, Mara replied. People don't like it when old power structures get shaken. As if on cue, Ash let out a sharp snort from the barn. Daniel stood immediately. Ash was rigid, body angled toward the open side of the pasture, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. His tail lashed once hard. Something was wrong. Daniel followed Ash's gaze and saw headlights cresting the far ridge. A vehicle. Moving slow. Too slow. It didn't approach the house. It turned off before reaching the gate. Mara swallowed. You weren't kidding. No, Daniel said. I wasn't. That night, the breaking point came. A loud crack split the air just after midnight. Not thunder. Too sharp. Ash exploded to his feet, slamming into the stall wall, panic flashing through his entire body. Daniel was up instantly, heart hammering, grabbing a flashlight and running toward the barn doors. Another crack. Glass shattered. Daniel hit the ground, dragging Ash's lead rope with him, pulling the horse away from the open side of the barn. Silence followed. Too much silence. The message was clear. We can still reach you. Mara left that same night under Daniel's insistence. Tell them everything, he said. If anything happens to me. She didn't let him finish. The next day, Daniel made the hardest decision of his life. He called the authorities. Not just local. He handed over the letter. The research. The names Walter had given him. Everything Samuel had died trying to protect. There was no turning back now. Ash stood nearby as Daniel spoke, calm but alert, as if understanding the weight of the moment. You ready for this? Daniel whispered, resting his forehead briefly against Ash's neck. Ash didn't move away. That was answer enough. The confrontation came sooner than expected. 2 men arrived at the ranch in unmarked vehicles. Suits too clean for the dust. Voices too polite. They asked questions Daniel had already answered. Smiled in ways that didn't reach their eyes. One of them glanced toward the barn. Still keeping the horse? Daniel met his gaze steadily. He's not going anywhere. The man's smile tightened. Some things, he said, are better left in the past. Daniel felt anger flare, but he didn't raise his voice. Some things don't stay buried, he replied. The men left. Ash stomped the ground, agitation rolling through him. Daniel exhaled slowly. I know, he said. I know. Days passed. Then weeks. The investigation deepened. More witnesses came forward. Documents surfaced. A pattern emerged, clearer than ever. And finally, the call came. They're making arrests, Mara said over the phone. It's real this time. Daniel sank into a chair, shaking. Outside, Ash stood at the fence line, sunlight warming his coat, the old bridle now hanging on a hook inside the barn. Retired, preserved. Samuel didn't die for nothing, Mara continued softly. Daniel closed his eyes. But resolution doesn't arrive all at once. That night, Daniel took Ash out to the far pasture. No halter. No rope. Just open land. Ash hesitated at first. Then walked beside him. Not behind. Not ahead. Together. You carried this for 25 years, Daniel said quietly. It ends now. Ash lifted his head, ears forward, eyes bright in the moonlight. The morning the truth became official, the ranch felt different. Not quieter, lighter. Daniel noticed it in the way the wind moved through the grass without resistance, in the way the barn doors no longer creaked like they were carrying a secret of their own. Even Ash seemed to sense it, standing tall in the early sunlight, coat glowing warm instead of worn. The news came just after sunrise. Mara's voice was steady, but Daniel could hear the weight behind it. It's done. Charges filed. The fire was ruled arson. Samuel's brother has been cleared. Samuel's name too. Daniel closed his eyes. For 25 years, the Hart name had carried a shadow. Now, it finally had air around it again. Thank you, Daniel said quietly. Mara paused. You didn't have to finish this. Daniel looked out toward the pasture where Ash stood watching him from a distance. Close enough to stay, far enough to choose. Yes, Daniel said. I did. That afternoon, Daniel took the old bridle down from its hook. He cleaned it carefully, slow and deliberate, like restoring a relic rather than an object. The cracks in the leather remained. The scars weren't erased. They didn't need to be. Daniel carried the bridle into the pasture, where Ash stood grazing. When Ash noticed it, he stiffened, not with fear, but with memory. Daniel stopped several feet away. I'm not putting it back on you, he said softly. I just wanted you to see it. Ash watched. Listened. Daniel placed the bridle gently on a fence post instead. That part's over. Ash took one step forward. Then another. He lowered his head and breathed out slowly, a long, deep exhale that seemed to empty 25 years of tension from his body. He nudged Daniel's shoulder lightly, then stood beside him. Side by side. That was the moment Daniel felt something settle inside himself too. Weeks passed. Ash changed. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But the sharp edges softened. He began to follow Daniel freely, without rope or halter. He stood quietly while Daniel brushed him, leaning into the contact like a horse finally certain it wouldn't be taken again. People came to see him. Not to buy. Not to judge. To understand. Daniel told the story when asked, not as spectacle but as truth. A truth that waited because it had to. Because sometimes the world needs time to catch up to courage. One afternoon, Daniel opened the gate and let Ash choose. The pasture beyond stretched wide and open. Freedom in every direction. Ash paused at the threshold, looked back, then walked forward, and stopped again, turning to stand beside Daniel. Choice made. A small memorial was held months later. Nothing grand. Just a plaque near the old barn site where the fire had once been blamed on chance. Samuel Hart. A man who refused to look away. Daniel brought Ash that day. The horse stood calm, ears forward, as if he understood why they were there. Daniel rested a hand against Ash's neck. You kept the promise, Daniel whispered. Now I will too. The promise wasn't written down. It didn't need to be. If you've watched this story to the end, you already know, it was never just about a horse. Or a letter. Or even a mystery. It was about what happens when someone finally stops walking past the truth. It was about patience over force. Memory over fear. And the quiet power of a bond that survives neglect, silence, and time. Ash was no longer the horse everyone ignored. He was the horse who carried a truth long enough for the world to be ready. And Daniel? He wasn't running anymore. If this story moved you, take a moment to honor it. Share it with someone who believes that trust can be rebuilt, and that justice, even delayed, still matters. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories where horses remind us who we are when we choose to listen. 'Cause sometimes, the truth doesn't need a voice. It just needs someone willing to see it.